In January 1970, a blizzard swept through northern Maine, turning Sebec Lake into a gigantic ice mirror that swallowed the headlights of lost cars in the night. A 21-year-old young man named Elijah Littlefield left the lumber mill late, driving his black Chevrolet Nova along the lakeside road, and disappeared forever. His last call was just a few interrupted words. "Mom, I'm on my way. Slippery car." Then silence. The police concluded it was an accident. The case closed, and winter covered all traces with thick snow. But his mother, Ruth Littlefield, didn't believe it. She spent her entire life sending letters, collecting reports, pleading with authorities, only to receive headshakes and silence. 50 years later, her grandson Caleb found an old box of documents with a faded note, "Boone, patrol near lake." A small detail revived the entire case thought dead. When a group of volunteer divers brought sonar and drones to Sebec Lake, blurry images from the bottom of the water revealed what time had once tried to hide. And as the truth rose from the cold lake bed, it not only brought Elijah back, but also forced the entire town of Dover-Foxcroft to confront its own sins, fears, and silence. This is not just a story about a disappearance. This is a journey of more than half a century in search of justice, where water, ice, and people all hold secrets that have never been spoken. Before diving deep into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love these forgotten journeys for justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Night draped a biting cold over the small town in Maine. Snow fell heavily, winds from Sebec Lake blew fiercely, slicing through the dark rows of trees. The lakeside road was empty, only the golden glow from a few houses spilling out before being swallowed by the fog. Elijah Littlefield drove his old Chevrolet Nova on the slippery road, the wipers laboring tiredly over the ice-covered windshield. He had just left the lumber mill, his body exhausted, but his mind turned toward the warm house on the other side of the lake where his mother awaited. The wheels suddenly skidded, the car veered off the road, the body tilting slightly, the headlights sweeping across the grass and then beaming straight down onto the frozen lake surface. The tires grinding on the ice rang out sharply before the car came to a stop, half on the grassy edge, half jutting out over the vast white expanse. Elijah took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. The snow continued to fall, growing heavier, as if blanketing the entire space. He got out of the car and walked toward the small gas station still lit up not far away, where the flickering neon lights reflected dimly on the snow. Inside, there was only a silent counter, the faint smell of oil and rubber. Elijah picked up the payphone receiver, the coin dropping into the slot with a dry metallic clink. He dialed, put the receiver to his ear, his voice hoarse from the cold. On the other end, his mother just managed to pick up. Amid the howling winds, his words came in bursts, mixed with static. He said the car had skidded off the road, that he was on the lakeside grass. Then the signal cut out, leaving only a strange hum. At the other end of the line, Ruth Littlefield stood frozen. The wooden house was utterly silent, only the crackling of the fire in the hearth audible. She called back, but the line wouldn't connect. The wind outside howled in gusts, the window panes rattling faintly. Ruth threw on her robe, went to the window, looked out at the snow-covered road. No car lights, no signs of movement. A premonition tightened her heart. She turned back inside, glanced at the grandfather clock ticking slowly, then picked up the receiver again. Her hand trembled as she dialed the county police station. Her voice was soft but urgent, mingled with cold breaths. Her son hadn't come home, and she thought something had happened on the lakeside road. The night dragged on in heavy silence. The lights in Ruth Littlefield's wooden house stayed on until the sky turned a silvery gray. Outside, winds from Sebec Lake howled, flinging ice pellets against the windows like clinking metal. Ruth sat in her chair, still wrapped in her coat, her eyes fixed on the lakeside road, where the golden lights from town were swallowed by the mist. When dawn broke, a patrol car pulled up to the porch. Two officers stepped out, snow clinging to their coats. They asked brief questions, Ruth recounting in halting words, her son drove a black Nova, called to say the car had skidded off the road, then the line went dead. One officer glanced toward the lake, the dim light reflecting off the vast white ice. He only said, "We'll look." They started along the road circling the lake. Snow blanketed everything thickly, the wind so fierce it drowned out the sound of footsteps. The roadside trees were frozen solid, bent double toward the ground. At the curve near the water's edge, one officer crouched and shone his flashlight. Beneath the snow, two short parallel indentations appeared, then vanished into the grassy bank. They brushed away the snow, revealing dark, damp ice underneath, as if something heavy had slid through. The other prodded gently with an iron bar, hearing a crack spread far like shattering glass. No one dared go further. Word of the search spread quickly. Locals brought flashlights, ropes, thermoses to help. They trudged along the lake shore, stomping step by step, eyes scanning the snow. The wind blended with the crunch of snow under boots, into a chilling sound. An old man said he'd never seen the lake freeze this thick. No one replied. They just bowed their heads and kept walking, as if silence could preserve a fragile thread of hope. By noon, the group paused at the gas station where Elijah had stopped to call. The owner recounted seeing headlights flash, then go out the night before. "I figured it was just some driver stuck in the snow," he said, "but come morning, all I saw was the grass all torn up." The police took notes, marked the spot, but the murky ice wouldn't let them see below. Every effort was futile. The wind shifted, and snow started falling again. Boone, the search leader, signaled to halt. "It's not safe anymore. We'll come back when the weather allows." Ruth stood at the roadside, scarf wrapped tight around her neck, watching them pack up their gear. Her face was set hard, so cold she couldn't feel the tears spilling out. As Boone passed by, she asked, "If it were your son, would you stop?" Boone fell silent, then quietly said, "We've done what we can." That night, Ruth didn't sleep. She sat by the window, a small lamp reflecting on the fog glass. Every time the wind gusted strong, she imagined hearing an engine rumbling from afar. Every time strange headlights swept by, she rushed to the porch, hoping for some news, but out there was only white snow. The next morning, the search team returned. This time, a few more locals came with iron hooks and tow ropes. They drilled test holes in the ice, dropped hooks down, pulled up only mud and weeds. One whispered, "If the car's out here, it's buried deep." Boone jotted a few lines in his notebook, then signaled to end it. "We'll wait till the ice thaws," he said, his voice steady and low. Ruth stayed by the lake, after everyone else had gone. The small flag they'd planted on the bank fluttered in the wind, the only red streak against the white snow. She stood still, eyes staring into the emptiness ahead. It was as if she believed that if she waited long enough, the ice would part on its own, and tell her what had happened. The wind rose again, carrying a skin-cutting chill, swirling around the small figure on the snow. When the last light of day faded, she still hadn't left. In her mind, there was only one thought: if her son was still out there somewhere, this lake would hold on to him, until someone was willing to listen. 3 days after Elijah vanished, snow still blanketed the roads around Sebec Lake thickly. The water surface was fully frozen, still as a sheet of white glass that barely reflected the faint morning light. In the Piscataquis County Sheriff's Office, the smell of coffee mingled with the cold. Deputy Harold Boone sat behind a wooden desk, a stack of mud-dampened papers from the scene in front of him. The top sheet read clearly, "Missing Person Report, Elijah Littlefield, 27 years old, resident of Dover-Foxcroft. No signs of foul play." He read it again, his finger pausing at skid marks on grass near water's edge, then drew a thin line through it, noting in the margin, "Unconfirmed, possibly from vehicle stopping." In the hallway, Ruth Littlefield sat motionless on a wooden bench, clutching her son's wool cap in her hands. She heard the clacking of the typewriter, an unusual chill rising in her chest. When Boone emerged, he handed her the confirmation paper, opening the file. Ruth read the final line. No evidence of foul play. Her eyes dry, just nodding. No one said another word. That afternoon, the Bangor Daily News ran a short item on page 3. Local man missing after snowstorm. No signs of criminal activity. No photo, no details, just 10 small lines between lumber prices and the weather forecast. Folks read it, folded the paper, murmured a couple words to each other, then fell silent. Ruth still called the station every evening. The answer was always the same. Nothing new. She asked when they'd search again. Boone said they had to wait for the ice to thaw. That reply was like a knife plunged into the silence. She went still, hung up the receiver, then sat watching the small fire in the hearth die out. A week later, Boone returned to the lake with a young deputy. The grassy bank was fully snow-covered now, the old indentations gone. They measured, snapped a few blurry photos, then noted, no additional evidence found. As they left, the wind whipped the marker flag loose, sending it sailing far across the ice. That afternoon, a middle-aged man stopped by the station. His name was Howard Simmons, owner of a cabin near the lake. He said that on the night Elijah went missing, while fixing his fireplace, he'd seen car lights flash out there, then go right out. He insisted it wasn't lightning. The sky that night was clear. Boone took a few notes, thanked him, and set the statement aside. In the official report sent up, Simmons's account didn't appear. Ruth brought coffee and donuts to the station, hoping for more info. Boone accepted them, said gently that we've done all we can. She said nothing, just looked out the frosted window where snow still fell thick. When she left, her shoes left small footprints on the floor, quickly erased by the draft through the door. Time passed, and the search was no longer mentioned. In the county file cabinet, the thin folder labeled Elijah Littlefield was sandwiched between two others, a missing hunter, a fisherman, who didn't return after a storm. The last line on the report read, "Pending review, no further action." Boone signed the monthly summary log, pausing a moment at the line, "Littlefield, E." before stamping it. He glanced out the window, where Sebec Lake was just a foggy white blur. In his mind, the image of those two grass indentations by the bank lingered, but he told himself it was just his imagination. No evidence, no case, he said to himself, his voice dry. Winter dragged on. When Ruth went to the market, people avoided her eyes, not out of coldness, but because they didn't know how to comfort her. She overheard whispers of maybe he just left, but she didn't respond, just bent down to rearrange the bunch of vegetables in her hands. One evening, she brought a small wooden-framed photo of Elijah to the station, the one of him smiling in his mill clothes, eyes bright and kind. She set the photo on the duty desk, said she wanted the police to keep it as a reminder that someone was still waiting. The young deputy standing there couldn't speak, just nodded faintly. A few days later, Boone sent the final report up to state headquarters. The conclusion was brief: no foul play suspected. Search suspended until further notice. He signed it, stamped it red. The disappearance of Elijah Littlefield was officially closed. At the house by the lake, Ruth carefully folded the report and placed it beside her son's framed photo. She read each line again, her finger lightly tracing the dry words. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the sound of cracking ice, mixed with water lapping the shore. Winter wasn't over yet, and with it, her waiting couldn't end. The news of Elijah's disappearance spread throughout Dover-Foxcroft and then gradually subsided like the chill on the lake's surface. Ruth carried the only photo of her son to every store, gas station, and church in town. She posted it on telephone poles, brick walls, community bulletin boards, pinning it down firmly so the snow wouldn't tear it. The cheap printed paper soaked up water, the letters blurring after a few days of wind. Passers-by stopped to look, nodded in sympathy, then quietly walked away. Caleb, Ruth's young nephew, followed her all over the streets. The boy held a stack of flyers, his hands freezing cold, trembling as he asked, "Auntie, "Will Uncle Elijah come back?" Ruth didn't answer, only saying softly, "Everyone has to know who he is." Her voice blended into the wind, faint but resolute. In the days that followed, Ruth wrote letters to local radio stations, asking them to read her son's name in the morning news. A small station in Bangor aired a brief announcement: "Man from Dover-Foxcroft missing in snowstorm. If anyone sees him, please report to county police." No one called back. In town, a few volunteers continued to help with the search. They carried floodlights, shovels, ropes along the shore of Sebec Lake. The sound of poles tapping on the ice rang out dry and hollow, the blinding wind forcing them to turn back after 3 days. When the snow fell thick again, the search ended. The townsfolk returned home, leaving the vast white expanse to the wind and ice. Whenever Ruth walked through the streets, they only nodded faintly, avoiding her eyes. By month's end, Sebec Lake was completely frozen over. The paths along the shore vanished under the snow. The lakeside houses were locked tight, their chimneys gone cold. One early morning, Ruth brought a small bouquet to the water's edge, standing still gazing at the flat, endless lake surface. She placed the bouquet on the snow, said something only she could hear, then quietly turned back. From then on, she rarely went out. Each morning, Ruth brewed a cup of coffee, placing it before Elijah's photo frame on the table. Sometimes she went to the police station, bringing cookies or dried flowers, asking if they had any new leads. Boone always replied in a calm voice, "We haven't seen anything yet." That phrase repeated until it became part of the silence in her home. On the church walls and market bulletin boards, the missing person notices began to fade. A few flyers were torn by the wind, leaving only half of Elijah's blurred face. Someone pasted over them, with a house for sale ad, pinning it through with a rusty nail. No one paid attention anymore. Winter grew harsher. The wind from the lake carried the cracking sounds of ice, echoing through the dark nights. Ruth heard it every evening, sitting motionless by the window. Sometimes she wrote in her notebook, "Tonight, it sounds like an engine echoing back." The short lines, shaky, interspersed with tear stains. Neighbors urged Ruth to let go, to let time heal. She only smiled faintly, her voice low. "I'm not looking for peace, I'm looking for my son." Deep inside, she still held a small faith that when spring came, the water would thaw, and the truth would rise with the lake's surface. But spring was still far off. On the shore, the pine trees bent low in the snowstorm, and in the house by the lake, the old mother still sat by the window, the oil lamp casting light on the old photo frame. She waited, as if hope, no matter how fragile, was the only thing still holding her to this world. When winter reached its coldest phase, Sebec Lake became a perfect mirror of ice, flat and stark white. No one spoke of Elijah Littlefield's disappearance anymore. At the desk in the county headquarters, Deputy Harold Boone typed the final lines of the report. The paper was neatly clipped into a gray folder, bold letters on the first page. "Case closed, probable accident." Under the conclusion, he typed one more short, chilling line: "No further search necessary." When the typewriter keys stopped, the room held only the wind whistling through the door cracks, and the lingering smell of cigarette smoke in the air. That report was sent to the Maine State Police in the first week of the following month. The county backup was stamped red and placed in a metal filing cabinet alongside hundreds of other minor cases. No meeting, no official announcement. The search ended, as if it had never begun. Ruth Littlefield didn't know the case had been closed. Each morning, she still wrote letters to the police, sometimes adding short lines, "If needed, I'll pay for the search." The letters received no reply. They piled up on the secretary's desk, passed through drawers, then lay still in a wooden box. When spring came, the paper yellowed, the ink faded. Townsfolk gradually stopped asking. At the grocery store, when someone mentioned Elijah, the shopkeeper just shrugged. "Police say it was an accident. Car slid off the road, nothing unusual." The phrase repeated from one mouth to another, turning the disappearance into a small story from that winter's snow, a thing told halfway, then dropped. Boone sometimes still drove along the lakeside road, where Ruth had once stood waiting in the wind. He pulled over, looked out over the ice, a heaviness settling in his chest. Once, weak sunlight hit the fine snow, reflecting a blinding white light that made him turn away. He told a colleague, there was nothing down there but mud and water. But deep in his mind, the image of two indented grass tracks along the shore kept returning, like an ink stain that wouldn't erase. Ruth still lived amid fragile hope. When the ice melted, she walked along the shore again, carrying her old binoculars, peering out at the water's silvery sheen. Each time she spotted a piece of wood or a scrap of metal drifting, she thought it might be a trace of her son's car. She called the police a few times, but they didn't come. "That's just spring driftwood," Boone said over the phone, his voice dry. After that, he stopped picking up when he saw her number. Summer came, and Sebec Lake turned deep green. Tourists started returning, pitching tents on the west shore. No one remembered that a few months earlier, the place had been the scene of a disappearance. The telephone pole where Ruth had posted the notice had been repainted, the paper long shredded by wind and rain. Ruth still kept sending petitions. She wrote in a trembling hand, recounting details of the last call, begging to reopen the search. All went unanswered. One final petition she sent directly to the state police, but only got back an envelope with a cold printed line. No new evidence. When the new winter arrived, the lake froze over again. Townsfolk set up a Christmas tree, strung lights along Main Street. Ruth stood on her porch, watching the colored bulbs reflect on the snow. She didn't hang lights that year. The small house sank into the dim light from the old oil lamp. Elijah's photo frame on the table, covered in a thin layer of dust. Boone was promoted to sheriff at year's end. In his short speech, he spoke of responsibility and dedication to the community. No one mentioned the Littlefield case. When a reporter asked about winter search efforts, he only replied, "We did everything we could." One evening, Ruth attended church service, wearing her old gray wool coat. When the pastor read a prayer for lost souls, she bowed her head, fingers clutching the Bible tightly. After the service, she lingered by the door, saying softly to the pastor, "I think my son never left this place." He looked at her, nodded gently, then moved on to shake other hands. That winter passed without change. Sebec Lake stayed frozen, the wind still piercing through the pines. Ruth still wrote letters, still waited, but in the county files, Elijah Littlefield's name was just a small line, tucked among closed cases. No one opened that drawer anymore, and for most of Dover-Foxcroft's residents, the disappearance was just an old snow-season tale, where a man vanished, and time quietly iced over every memory. In the years that followed, Dover-Foxcroft changed gradually. The dirt road around Sebec Lake was paved, the old wooden houses repainted brighter, and the gas station, where Elijah had once stopped, was just a moss-covered concrete foundation. The town expanded, but time couldn't erase the old fog over memories of that winter. In the county police station's archives, the steel filing cabinet was moved to a back room, stacks of yellowed papers piled high. Among them, the file named Elijah Littlefield lay still, gathering dust, untouched. Deputy Harold Boone was promoted to sheriff at the start of the new decade. He became a familiar face at ceremonies and fall fairs, speaking of community safety and Maine's resilient spirit. The press called him the town's keeper of order. Residents trusted and respected him, mentioning him with pride. And Elijah's disappearance faded further into shadow, an old story no one wanted to revisit. Ruth Littlefield aged quickly. Her hair turned snow-white, her frame shrinking inside the thick old shawl. The house by the lake stayed the same, Elijah's photo frame by the window, facing the water. Each winter, she wrote a letter to the police, always starting with the old line, "Please reopen my son's case." She sent one every year, and every year got no reply. Writing the letters became a ritual, like her way of affirming that Elijah hadn't truly vanished. At the market, folks still saw her quietly walking down Main Street, bag of bread in hand, eyes drifting toward the lake. The young ones didn't know her story, just called her the lady by Sebec Lake. Older folks sometimes still mentioned Elijah, their voices trailing off like talking to themselves. He probably just left. They set it to move on, then shifted to talk of hunting season or lumber prices, treating the disappearance like a faint part of town memory. At the station, Boone sometimes still thought of her. Once while patrolling the lakeshore, he spotted Ruth standing alone on the snowy bank, eyes staring far out over the water. He stopped the car, about to approach, but only nodded in greeting. Her gaze passed over him, kind but cold. Boone drove home, heart heavy. He knew better than anyone that the case had never been solved, but he told himself, some things are better left alone. Time flowed, the town grew with forgetting. A small shopping center sprouted near the highway, the church added a community hall. In summer, people came to the lake to fish, paddle boats, photograph sunsets reflecting on the water. No one knew that where they stood had once been the grassy bank, where a man vanished in the snowy night. Ruth still kept the old newspapers, and all the unanswered letters in a small wooden box. Each year, on the day Elijah disappeared, she took them out to reread, rearranging them in order, dusting the son's photo frame. Sometimes she opened the window, listening to the wind whistling over the lake, whispering, "If you're still here, let your mother know." She didn't wait for an answer, just sat silent. Boone was honored upon retirement. At the town hall ceremony, he spoke of honesty and dedication, ending with "Sometimes peace matters more than truth." Everyone applauded. No one noticed the white-haired woman in the back row bowing her head, hands clutching an old woolen scarf tightly. The next year, Ruth's health faded. She couldn't reach the lake anymore. Each afternoon, she sat by the window, light filtering through the foggy glass, illuminating her aged face, but eyes still bright. She whispered to herself that her son had never left this place. When Ruth passed away, they found an unsent envelope in her desk drawer, scrawled on the outside, "I don't believe this was an accident." Beside it was the old case file, Elijah's photo, police report, and stack of unanswered letters. Those things were kept by Caleb, her nephew. He stared at the writing on the envelope a long time, then said softly, "Auntie, you've waited long enough." Outside, Sebec Lake reflected the sunset. The water's surface was so still, it seemed nothing had ever disturbed it. But in the town's heart, the story of Elijah lingered like a faint echo, a small whisper in the wind, never truly silenced. After Ruth Littlefield's funeral, the small house by Sebec Lake fell silent, as if her last warmth had dissolved into the air. Caleb Ferris, her grandson, returned to clean up. He had grown up in that house, heard vague stories about the uncle he never knew, but never fully understood her persistent obsession. Now, amid the scent of old wood and the dim afternoon light, Caleb felt the past waiting for him in every drawer. On the desk by the window, where Ruth still sat every morning, he found a locked wooden box. The key was hidden in a drawer, wrapped in a faded woolen cloth. When he opened it, dust from years past clouded the air, revealing familiar items, a photo of Elijah, in his millwork clothes, a few yellowed newspaper clippings, and a stack of letters carefully tied with an old ribbon. At the bottom of the box was a large envelope, scrawled on the outside in trembling handwriting, "Elijah's case, never an accident." Caleb opened the envelope. Inside was a photocopy of the 1970 police report. On the discolored paper, amid the straight lines of typewritten text, there was a handwritten note in pencil. Boone was there. He stared at the words, a chill running down his spine. In his memory, he recalled Ruth mentioning that name, the Sheriff Boone who had led the search, but she had never said anything outright. He sat still for a long time, gazing out at the calm lake surface beyond the window, where sunset stained the endless ribbon of water red. That night, Caleb took the box of files back to Bangor, spreading out the papers one by one under the desk lamp. The old news clipping was brief. No signs of foul play. The interview with the gas station attendant, cut off abruptly. He noticed many irregularities, crossed out lines, vague annotations, Boone's signature in a different ink color. The more he read, the more the file seemed like a hastily shut door, rather than a report. The next day, Caleb went to the Bangor Public Library. In the digital archives, he searched the list of long-term missing persons cases and found the phone number for the Maine Cold Case Unit, the division specializing in old files. After much hesitation, he called. The female operator's voice was light but firm. "You can send the documents, we'll review them." That simple response gave him a spark of hope that his grandmother had never had. Caleb photographed all the papers, emailing them with a note. "My family believes the 1970 incident in Dover-Foxcroft was never properly investigated." Afterward, he sat silently for hours, thinking about Ruth's life, the woman who had spent half a century waiting for an answer. In the following days, Caleb drove to Sebec Lake. He stopped at the roadside by the water, where she had once said Elijah disappeared. The grass had greened again after all these years, but the ground still sank slightly, as if carrying memories of old winters. He knelt down, touching the cold soil, listening to the wind over the lake, and imagining Ruth's voice, still echoing, "He's still there, it's just no one wants to look." A week later, the Maine Cold Case Unit responded. They thanked him for the documents, and noted that Sebec Lake was on the list of areas marked inaccessible due to depth and thick mud. The 1970 searches had only been done visually, without underwater scanning equipment. "We'll review it, and may use sonar for a survey," the email said. Caleb read those words over and over, his heart racing. For the first time, Elijah's case was no longer buried in the shadows of a filing cabinet. That evening, he opened the wooden box again. Among the stack of old letters, he found the last one Ruth had written but never sent. The handwriting trembled, but it was still clear. "If my son is really down there, please find him so he can come home." Caleb gently folded the letter, his eyes lingering on the photo of Elijah smiling in his work clothes. Outside the window, snow began to fall lightly, the wind whistling through the frame with a soft sound like breathing. He whispered, almost to himself, "I'll do it, Grandma. This time, no one will bury this anymore." In the small room, the desk lamp cast light on the photo, reflecting the bright eyes of the lost man. Outside, Sebec Lake remained flat and still, but to Caleb, it seemed that beneath that water, something was beginning to stir, a long-buried secret, about to rise after more than half a century of sleep. After the Cold Case Unit's response, Caleb Ferris understood that they could only review the file, not guarantee a search. He needed a team that could act faster, people who specialized in finding missing persons underwater. For many nights, Caleb sat at his computer, tracking volunteer dive groups across the country. When he came across the Exploring with Depths channel by Jeremy Sides and Adam Brown, he knew he'd found the right people. They had traveled all over America, helping recover decades-old missing persons cases, with the same motto, "We just want to bring them home." Caleb wrote a long email, summarizing Elijah's case, attaching a map of Sebec Lake, the photocopied police report, the note Boone was there, and Ruth's final letter. At the end, he wrote, "My grandmother spent her life looking for answers. I can't let it stay buried any longer." He sent it late at night, unsure if anyone would read it. 3 days later, his inbox pinged with a reply, "We're listening." Just 3 words, but enough to make Caleb hold his breath. In the email, Jeremy wrote, "We've looked it over. This case is viable. Sebec Lake isn't too large, but we'll need depth data and weather info. If possible, we'll come to Maine." Caleb immediately sent topographic maps, site photos, and even Ruth's old notes. He ended with a brief "Thank you. If you come, I'll be there." 2 days later, his phone rang. Jeremy's voice was deep and steady. "We're coming next week. Before the ice gets thicker." Beside him, Adam chimed in, his tone cheerful, "If we're lucky, we'll find something." "You ready?" Caleb replied, his voice hoarse, "My grandmother waited half a century. I'm ready." In the following days, Caleb prepared everything, getting local authority permits, renting a small boat, and recreating the search map Ruth had marked. The red circle on the map, where she had written, "He's here," now became the focal point. He walked along the lake shore each afternoon, gazing at the flat water surface. In his mind, her voice still rang out, "If you hear the water, remember it's holding an answer." When Jeremy's team arrived in Maine, the sky was thick gray, the temperature just a few degrees above freezing. Caleb waited at the South Lake dock, his breath dissolving in the cold wind. 2 silver trucks pulled up, emblazoned with exploring with depths. Jeremy stepped out, tall and sturdy. Adam was younger, smiling warmly, carrying a case of equipment. They shook hands, their eyes serious but kind. "We don't promise anything," Jeremy said, "but we'll search until we have answers." That afternoon, they began the survey. Jeremy piloted the boat, Adam operated the side-scan sonar on both sides. Caleb sat in the back, eyes glued to the screen displaying sound waves, gray-black patches rippling across the lake bottom. They followed the eastern area, right where Ruth had suspected. The wind blew hard, rippling the water surface, but the machine recorded clearly. After nearly an hour, the screen showed a long rounded corner shape deep in the mud. Adam lowered his voice. "There's something here." Jeremy slowed, eyes fixed on the screen. "Could be a vehicle," he said quietly. No one replied. The engine hummed steadily, mingling with the waves slapping the hull. They marked the coordinates, deciding to use a dive drone for verification the next morning. As they headed back to shore, Caleb watched the boat cut through the waves in the sunset. For the first time, he felt Sebec Lake was no longer just a silent expanse of memory-bound water, but a place gradually revealing something. That evening, the 3 sat in Ruth's old wooden house, sharing a simple meal by oil lamp light. Jeremy reviewed the sonar data, flipping through his notebook as he spoke. "If it's a vehicle, it's at about 18 feet deep. Deep enough to stay buried in mud for decades." Caleb asked softly, "What do you think the chances are of finding a body?" Jeremy looked up, his gaze calm. "We've seen cases like this before. When people vanish, water often holds them. The issue is just whether anyone bothers to look down." Night fell, snow falling heavily. Caleb sat alone in the room, looking out at the lake. The team's flashlight beams reflected on the water like moving sparks, flickering in the mist. He remembered the promise he'd made before her photo frame. "I'll find him." Now that was about to become reality. The next morning, they headed to the lake early. Thin ice coated the surface, the cold wind cutting through their jackets. Jeremy lowered the dive drone, the cable slipping from Adam's hands as the device's yellow light sank into the murky gray water. The screen showed fuzzy images, rocks, branches, then a flat metal patch peeking from the mud. "There it is," Jeremy said quietly. Caleb held his breath. The drone turned slowly, the light sweeping over the angled corner of the object, a metal frame shaped like a car. "We need more confirmation," Jeremy said, his voice steady, but his eyes lighting up. "Don't jump to conclusions, but this matches every assumption your grandmother had." Caleb bowed his head, trying to hide his tears. After more than half a century, it seemed Sebec Lake's waters were finally willing to give back an answer. That evening, they returned to Ruth's house. Jeremy took meticulous notes, saying he would send the sonar data and drone images to the cold case unit that night. "If it's the vehicle, the state will handle recovery. But the hardest part is done," he said. Caleb nodded, his voice choked. "My grandmother waited her whole life for this moment." Outside, snow still fell quietly. Sebec Lake lay still in the white mist, but within it, the secret had begun to shift. In the dim yellow light, Jeremy said softly, "We don't know what we'll find tomorrow. But at least, we've heard the voice of the past." Caleb looked out at the lake, smiling faintly. In the cold wind, he felt as if Ruth were standing there, silently watching, her face finally at rest. The next morning, Sebec Lake was blanketed in thick fog like smoke. The air was so cold that breaths turned to mist before their faces. Jeremy and Adam brought the equipment to the dock: side-scan sonar, GPS, display screen and data logger. Caleb was there early, standing and gazing at the flat water in the pale light. Jeremy said curtly, "Calm weather, still water, ideal for scanning." The boat left shore, gliding slowly across the lake. The steady engine hum echoed in the quiet space. Adam adjusted the sonar array, sending sound waves fanning down to the bottom. The screen showed black and white wave bands, undulating like an underwater map of the lake. Any metal object would reflect stronger, and that's what they were looking for. When they reached the area Ruth had marked years ago, Jeremy slowed. "Hold this course," he said. Adam lowered the frequency, increased contrast. A dark shadow gradually appeared on the screen, a long shape tilted in the mud. "You see it?" Adam asked. Jeremy nodded. "Strong return, clear edges, not rock." They zoomed in on the image. The metal object was about 15 feet long, with round reflection points at wheel positions. The structure was so complete, it couldn't be mistaken. Jeremy said quietly, "A vehicle. Could be an old sedan." Caleb stood still, his heart pounding. He stared at the blurry shape on the screen, the thing his grandmother had spoken of for half a century. "He's still there." Jeremy recorded the GPS coordinates, his pen hand trembling slightly. "Mark it again," he said. Adam saved the data, rescanning from another angle for confirmation. On the screen, the object sharpened with each pass. The roof caved in, the front end buried, the body half sunk in mud. Mud cover at least 2 feet thick, Adam estimated. "Looks like it's been there a long time." The three stared at the screen, no one speaking. Only the steady ping of the machine sounded like the lake's heartbeat. Caleb clenched his fists, his throat tightening. All the doubts, all the rumors, the years Ruth lived with fragile faith, everything now appeared before his eyes. Jeremy screenshot the screen, saving it to the hard drive. "We'll send it to the cold case unit today," he said. The boat circled the discovery point. The collected data matched, confirming the shape as a vehicle. Adam said softly, "Setting style from the late 60s. Could be the Nova." Jeremy nodded. "Location matches the original report, about 80 feet from shore." He marked the map, adding a note, "Suspected vehicle, coordinates 45.187, NE, 69.255W. As they returned to shore, the wind blew harder and colder. Jeremy opened his laptop, sending all the data to the cold case unit in Augusta with a note. "Discovered suspected vehicle buried in mud. Request confirmation." 10 minutes later, a reply email arrived. "Data received. Preserve the scene. Forwarding to forensics." Jeremy read it aloud, then said quietly, "They believe it." The group rested in a small coffee shop in town center. Caleb remained silent, looking out the window where snow fell more sparsely. Adam touched his shoulder lightly. "If it's the vehicle, your grandmother was right from the start." Caleb replied softly, "I just wish she were alive to see it." That afternoon, they returned to the lake for more data. The water was calmer, weak sunlight piercing the clouds, casting silver streaks. Jeremy ran the boat slowly, sonar scanning again. The image appeared clearer, the hood tilted, front wheels sunk deep, frame covered in thick mud. Adam pointed, "Looks like the door's open. Possible impact on entry." Jeremy nodded. "This vehicle wasn't thrown in. It drove straight." Caleb held his breath, picturing that snowy storm night. Elijah's phone call, howling wind, interrupted signal. The image of Ruth standing on the porch, waiting endlessly for her son to return. Now that vehicle lay right beneath this water, waiting half a century to be seen again. As they packed up the equipment, the sun had set behind the pine ridge. Jeremy turned off the engine, standing and gazing at the lake for a long moment. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll send the drone down to check. If it's the vehicle, this will be the missing piece of the story." Adam nodded, tightening the ropes on deck. Caleb stayed last. He looked out at the darkening lake, where small ripples dissolved into the mist. For a moment, he thought he saw the faint reflection of a headlight in the gray water. An illusion, or memory, he didn't know. He only knew that, after all these years, Sebec Lake's waters had finally begun to reveal what they held. Back at Ruth's house, Caleb lit the small lamp beside the old photo frame. He opened his laptop, reviewing the sonar images, the black metal shadow, lying still on the lake bottom, clear and undeniable. The screen light reflected on Elijah's face in the frame. Caleb said softly, "We're about to bring him home, Grandma." Outside, snow fell sporadically. Wind whistled through the pines, sighing lightly over the lake. In the yellow light from the porch, steam rose like smoke, blending into the gray sky. Everything was quiet again, but this time, it was no longer the silence of forgetting, but the hush before the truth was revealed. The next morning, fog blanketed the surface of Lake Sebec, cold enough that footsteps on the wooden dock echoed dryly. Jeremy and Adam prepared the ROV drone, checking the cables, battery, and camera. Caleb stood by, gazing at the still water like a submerged mirror. "We just need to confirm the image clearly," Jeremy said, his voice low, "and we'll know the truth." The small boat pulled away from shore, gliding slowly through the gray water. When they reached yesterday's coordinates, Adam opened the control screen, and Jeremy lowered the drone. Golden light from the device's floodlights pierced the murky water, reflecting off the thin layer of ice above. The image emerged gradually, swaying seaweed, rocks, and branches. Then from the left corner of the screen, a metallic shape appeared, a round outline, faintly gleaming. "There it is," Jeremy whispered. Adam increased the brightness, and the drone moved closer. A portion of the radiator grille flashed, the Chevrolet lettering faded but clear. Caleb leaned in, his heart pounding. "Chevy Nova, 1969 model," Jeremy confirmed. The drone moved slowly along the car's body, moss covering the black paint. When it reached the rear, Adam angled the camera down. The light swept over a gleaming metal piece, a silver license plate, bent at one corner, but the number sequence still visible. M749, Caleb choked up. That was the license plate from Elijah's file. He couldn't speak, just stared at the screen, tears welling up. The drone circled the car's body. The driver's side door was half lowered, the windshield shattered, shards of glass clinging to the rusted frame. Inside was empty, no seats, no human remains, just a thick layer of mud coating the floor. Jeremy said softly, "The door's open." He might have tried to escape. Caleb nodded, unable to speak. The drone continued along the dented roof, the front wheels sunk in the mud. Everything indicated the car had been there for half a century, held fast by time and cold water. "No doubt about it," Adam said, his voice firm. "This is Elijah Littlefield's Nova." Jeremy quickly noted the GPS coordinates, saving all the image data. He tilted his head, looking out at the murky gray lake. "It's been here for 50 years, right under everyone's noses." The boat returned to shore. Jeremy opened his laptop, uploaded the video, and sent it to the Maine cold case unit with a note. "Discovery of 1969 Chevrolet Nova, license plate M749, matching 1970 missing persons file." A cold wind blew through, making the screen tremble slightly. When the email sent, no one said another word. That afternoon, they received a reply, "Data confirmed. Elijah Littlefield case reopened, legal team will deploy for salvage." Adam read the message again, turning to Caleb. "It's official now." Caleb looked down at his trembling hands, whispering, "Grandma was right, all her life." Word spread quickly through town. A few curious locals came to the lake, standing at a distance to stare at the buoy line marking the spot in the water. State police requested the scene be secured, and would send a tech team within the week. A local reporter called Jeremy, but he replied curtly, "No comment, let the family hear it first." Caleb was grateful, squeezing his hand, his eyes still wet. That evening, they ate together in Ruth's old wooden house. Jeremy replayed the drone video on the laptop screen. Dim light flickered onto Elijah's framed photo on the shelf. When the license plate image sharpened, Caleb reached out to touch it lightly, his voice trembling. "This is the proof she waited her whole life for." Jeremy replied, and she was right. Outside, snow began falling thickly, clinging to the roof and blocking the path to the dock. Lake Sebec lay silent, as if nothing had happened, but deep in its waters, the truth had finally been seen. The next day, the cold case unit issued an official statement, Discovery of Elijah Littlefield's 1970 missing vehicle at Lake Sebec, Piscataquis County. Case reopened to investigate cause of death. The news hit the front page of the Bangor Daily News. The small headlines were enough to shake the normally peaceful town. Caleb read the article in silence. Each word echoed Ruth's old promise, "I won't stop until I find my boy." He stepped out onto the porch, watching snow drift over the lake, whispering, "We found him, Grandma." That afternoon, he returned to the lake with Jeremy and Adam. On the water's surface, the small yellow buoy still floated, marking where the Chevrolet rested on the bottom. Jeremy stared at it for a long time, then said, "The lake never lies, it just waits for someone patient enough to listen." Adam nodded, "And now, it's given back what it held." Caleb stood still, cold wind slipping through his collar. Lake Sebec no longer felt as terrifying as in his memories. It was a piece of memory, returned to him. In the fading afternoon light, snow melted into water, forming thin streaks that reflected a silvery gray. Inside the small house, the drone video still played the scene of the car lying motionless on the lake bottom. The drone's light swept over the radiator grill, the license plate, then faded out. Elijah's photo on the shelf seemed to glow softly for a moment. Outside, wind from the lake whispered through the door cracks, not the sound of loss anymore, but the breath of memory found. News of the Chevrolet Nova salvaged from Lake Sebec spread across Maine overnight. Headlines screamed, "1970 disappearance, vehicle found." Locals gossiped, but for Caleb Ferris, it was no longer news. It was the beginning of the truth his grandmother had waited her whole life for. At the Maine Cold Case Unit office in Augusta, Inspector Dana Heller received the file along with sonar data from the dive team. After viewing the video, she confirmed, "Chevrolet Nova, 1969 model. License plate matches Elijah Littlefield's file." The order to reopen the case was signed that same day. Heller requested the original 1970 files. Yellowed stacks of paper arrived, faded typewriter ink, many sections crossed out. Deputy Harold Boone's report was a scant 4 pages, concluding weather-related accident. But Heller quickly spotted irregularities. A note about tire tracks leading toward the east shore of the lake had been whited out with green ink. In Boone's duty log, the time frame from 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. on the night of the incident was completely blank. 3 hours gone, Heller said, and the very night Elijah disappeared. The vehicle was pulled up, and the forensics team began examination. Inside remained only a leather wallet, a keychain with a lumber mill logo, and a few hairs caught on the back seat. Heller ordered DNA testing. The results matched 100% with Ruth Littlefield's sample from medical records. "No doubt now," she said, "Elijah has been found." But reviewing the files, Heller uncovered more buried details. The gas station owner Howard Simmons' report, who had once said he saw headlights flash toward the lake, had vanished entirely from the archives. "Someone tried to clean up every lead," she noted. Meanwhile, a young investigator found Boone's personal notebook in a separate file box. Amid the old scribbles, a faint pencil line, 305, patrol along lake shore, saw tire tracks, thin ice, withdrew. Clear evidence Boone had been at the scene the night Elijah vanished. When summoned, Boone, now 86, living in Bangor, appeared weary. Before Heller, he spoke softly, "I don't remember. Maybe I drove by. That night the snow was heavy, I didn't see anything." Heller placed the duty log on the table, her voice calm, "But you noted tire tracks toward the shore. Why was this detail erased from the report?" Boone fell silent. After a moment, he replied, "Because I wasn't sure. I didn't want to cause a panic." That statement only fueled suspicion. In her internal report, Heller concluded, "Discrepancies and lack of candor in initial files. Evidence of obstruction of investigation." She forwarded the findings to the Maine Attorney General's office, requesting Boone's subpoena for testimony. Supplemental forensics results further confirmed, on the car door, traces of fabric and degraded blood samples indicated Elijah had tried to escape as water flooded in. This discovery turned the case from mere accident to proof of serious initial report tampering. Heller notified Caleb. Elijah died in an accident, but the 1970 investigation was skewed. Boone knew, but stayed silent. Caleb went still, tears streaming unchecked. Grandma told the truth, he whispered, and they didn't listen. News spread across the state. The Bangor Daily News headlined, 1970 cold case, ex-cop suspected of altering report. Residents of Dover-Foxcroft began whispering. Some said Boone had just made a judgment call, others bluntly. He knew, but wanted to protect his reputation. Days later, Heller and the forensics team returned to Lake Sebec, diving to scour around the vehicle's position. Beneath the mud, they found shards of glass, plastic fragments, and a scrap of fabric snagged on tree roots. Analysis showed blood traces matching those in the car, proving Elijah may have gotten the door open, but was swept away by the water. He fought until the end, Heller said, her voice low. 3 months later, the interim conclusion was released. Elijah Littlefield died in an accidental vehicle plunge into Lake Sebec. The 1970 investigation involved misconduct and file alterations, attributable to former Deputy Harold Boone. A subpoena for Boone was issued. He didn't resist, only asking softly, "What good will it do now?" Heller replied coolly, "Justice has no expiration date, sir." In Dover-Foxcroft, Caleb stood by the lake shore watching snow fall, hearing the case officially shift from closed to active cold case investigation. He called Heller, his voice shaky but clear. "Thank you for believing." Grandma's probably smiling now. In the Augusta office, Heller gazed out the window at the silent falling snow, smiling faintly. She closed the file, affixing a new label, Elijah Littlefield, 1970 reopened. After 50 years, the truth was finally rewritten. Concise, clear and indelible. The small house on the outskirts of Bangor sat quiet amid the snowy afternoon. Inside, Harold Boone sat in his wheelchair, a wool blanket draped over his knees. At 86, he still held the sturdy frame of an old officer, but cloudy eyes and trembling hands showed time had stripped away his last pride. Inspector Dana Heller entered with 2 cold case unit investigators. On the table lay the old file, a few photos of the rusted Chevrolet Nova. Boone looked up, his voice raspy. "I've said it all. What more do you want?" Heller gently, "We just want you to confirm. Why was the detail about tire tracks toward the East Lake shore erased from the report?" Boone was silent for a moment, eyes on the window where snow blanketed the yard. "That night the snow was heavy," he said slowly. "I was patrolling alone. I saw the tire tracks, yes, but the wind was fierce, ice thin. I figured it wasn't serious." "And you left?" Boone nodded. "Didn't go back to check. I was afraid the ice would break," he replied softly, almost self-justifying. Heller opened the file bag, pulling out a photocopy of the whited-out line. 305, Patrol East Shore, saw tire tracks, withdrew. "You wrote this then erased it," she said. "Why?" Boone stared at the paper for a long time, his voice small. "Because I didn't want to get reprimanded for leaving the scene. I thought someone else would check in the morning, but no one did." Heller placed a photo of the Nova pulled from Lake Sebec in front of him. "This is what you left behind." Boone looked down, his hands shaking. "I didn't think it was him," he muttered. "I only heard about the disappearance days later. By then it was too late." Heller met his gaze. "You could have spoken up, but you chose silence." Boone bowed his head. "I didn't want to be seen as the guy who let someone die," he said quietly. "I told myself maybe he'd just left town, easier than believing I'd abandoned someone." The room fell silent. Heller pulled Ruth Littlefield's photo from the file, placing it on the table. "This woman believed you were hiding something her whole life." Boone stared at it for a long time, eyes reddening. "I know," he said. "Every year she came to the station, I'd hide in my office, watch through the window. I didn't have the courage to face her." "Because of regret?" Boone nodded. "Every time it snowed, I'd hear the engine again and the water. I tried to forget, but couldn't. Heller softened her tone. The truth isn't to accuse you, it's to end it. Boone looked up, his gaze empty. I still remember that sound, the heavy splash, then silence. I knew someone was down there, but I turned away. No one spoke. Heller nodded slightly, her voice steady. We'll record it just as you said. Boone looked down at the table, his hands trembling violently. I was wrong, he whispered. I thought time would erase it all. But every winter, I still see that lake. As they prepared to leave, Boone asked softly, now that I've said it, does it even matter? Heller replied, it matters to the one who's gone, and to you. Boone sat still, tears falling onto his wrinkled hands. Elijah deserved to be found sooner, he said. I'm sorry. Leaving the house, Heller watched the thick falling snow, her breath fogging the air. She turned to the young investigator. Sometimes guilt doesn't come from malice, it's from fear. The other nodded, saying nothing. In the report sent back to Augusta that day, Heller noted concisely, subject Boone admits to altering the report and being at the scene on disappearance night. Expresses remorse, recommends prosecution for obstruction of justice. She folded the file, gazing at the misty sky. That evening, Boone sat by the window. He opened a drawer, pulling out an old photo of himself with colleagues from 1969. The young face in the picture smiled confidently. He stared at it for a long time, then whispered, Elijah, I'm sorry. In Dover-Foxcroft, Caleb received the call that Boone had confessed the truth. He stood by Lake Sebec's shore, where winter wind rustled over the frozen water, whispering. Finally he spoke. At the cold case unit office, Heller finished the final report of the day. On the first page, she wrote a short line, 50 years of silence. The water has answered now. Outside snow fell quietly, blanketing roofs and docks. But this time, the snow didn't bury the truth, it only covered the past, letting what remained rest in peace. 3 days after the interrogation, the arrest warrant for Harold Boone was signed. That morning, thin snow fell on the roofs of Bangor. 2 officers from the Maine State Police knocked on the door. Boone was already sitting in his wheelchair, coat neatly on, face calm. When they read him his rights, he just nodded slightly. I knew this would come. It should have come a long time ago. He was charged with 2 counts: obstruction of justice and falsification of public records. The first for concealing evidence on the night Elijah went missing, the second for altering the report that had kept the case closed for over half a century. Boone was taken to the Augusta Detention Center for his final statement. In front of the press cameras he said only one sentence, I've regretted it for 50 years. The news spread across the state. Newspapers published photos of the former sheriff with silver hair, a gaunt face, and weary eyes. Headlines blared in unison, former Maine sheriff arrested in 1970, case. In Dover-Foxcroft, where it all began, the news hit like a shock. In the town's coffee shop, people argued. Some said Boone had just made a mistake in the storm. Others countered, that mistake buried justice for half a century. No one won the debate. The whole town was divided, between pity and outrage. On local social media, opinions were just as tangled. Some called Boone a victim of the old times, others shot back. He chose silence. No one forced him. The evening news showed footage of the police car taking Boone from his home, white snow all around. At the bottom of the screen, the ticker read, 50 years of silence, justice returns to Sebec Lake. The cold case unit office received dozens of thank you letters from other victims' families. Inspector Heller replied only once, no one's happy arresting an old man, but justice doesn't get old. When Caleb heard the news, he was by Sebec Lake. He stared at the frozen water, reading the alert on his phone, and feeling empty inside. Boone had made a mistake, but he'd carried that guilt in silence his whole life. Caleb remembered Heller's words, guilt doesn't just come from malice, but from fear. On the day Boone went to court, it was bitterly cold. He was wheeled into the courtroom, flashes popping non-stop. The judge read the charges, the prosecutor emphasizing that a falsified report delayed justice for half a century. Boone's lawyer, an old friend, asked for leniency due to his age and frail health. When given a chance to speak, Boone just bowed his head. "I won't make excuses, I was wrong." The hearing lasted less than an hour. The court allowed him release on his own recognizance pending trial, due to his health and cooperation with the investigation. As he left the room, Boone caught sight of Caleb in the back row. Their eyes met for a moment, no hatred left, just acknowledgement that the past had finally found its voice. Caleb said softly, "Thank you for speaking up." Boone nodded, his cloudy eyes lighting with a hint of relief. That evening, the TV news replayed the image, Boone with head bowed, wheelchair rolling out of court, ticker below, "A winter closes with a confession." In Dover-Foxcroft, folks watched in silence. Some cried, some turned off the TV, but everyone understood, the truth had finally been named. On the shore of Sebec Lake, Caleb stood alone. Wind blew over the thick ice, moonlight reflecting dimly on the water. He whispered, "Grandma, justice came, even if late." In the distance, house lights gleamed on the white ice, shimmering like memories of the winter of 1970, where silence had finally been broken. Harold Boone's official interrogation took place at the Piscataquis County Courthouse, in a small room with cold white light. Boone was wheeled in, hands folded over his chest, eyes distant. In front of him sat Inspector Dana Heller, and a representative from the prosecutor's office. The air was so quiet you could hear the scratch of pens on paper. Heller started in a calm voice, "We just want you to tell it again, minute by minute, of the night of January 12, 1970. No need for excuses." Boone took a deep breath, gaze far away. "I've kept it in my head for over half a century," he said. "Saying it now is like dropping a stone in water. You don't know how deep it sinks." He recounted that the snow was falling so thick that headlights only lit a few feet ahead. Wind howled, roads slick like ice. Boone was on night patrol alone, driving from the town center toward Sebec Lake. Around 3 a.m., passing the east shore curve, he spotted 2 fresh tire tracks, dug into the snow, stretching from the road down the slope. "I remember it clear," he said. "Snow churned up, like someone had braked hard. I stopped the car, rolled down the window, heard only the wind whistling, and a faint engine, then nothing." The room went silent. Boone bowed his head, voice quieter. "I knew something was wrong, but I also knew that road was dangerous. Thin ice, slippery slope, if I went down, my car could slide after. I stayed there nearly 5 minutes. I thought maybe someone had walked away. Maybe I'd heard wrong." Heller asked, "You didn't call for help?" Boone shook his head. "No, I was afraid of a false alarm. Storm raging, rescue team was posted elsewhere. I didn't want to look panicked." He admitted turning the car around, leaving the scene without reporting anything. "I told myself I'd come back in the morning, but when I did, snow had covered every trace, and I chose silence." The prosecutor asked, "Why did you alter the report?" Boone replied, voice breaking, "Because I was a coward. I rewrote it to hide what I'd seen, the tire tracks, the time, the location. I was scared my superiors would think I'd shirked duty. I figured if no one asked, it would disappear." He went on that a few days later, when he heard Elijah Littlefield was missing, he realized the horror. The spot with the tire tracks was exactly the stretch of road Elijah had driven that night. "I knew right away," he said, "but I couldn't admit it. My report was already filed. If I spoke up, they'd ask why I didn't help. I couldn't face it." Boone paused, catching his breath, voice trembling. "I've lived with it for 50 years. Every time I hear wind over the lake, I remember. I convinced myself I'd heard wrong, but really, I heard that car's engine, the last sound." Heller silently took notes. "So you confirm, you were at the scene when Elijah went into the lake?" Boone nodded. "Yes, I didn't see it, but I heard. The wind tires screeching, then metal hitting water. I knew someone was down there." His voice choked. "I meant to stop, but my hands wouldn't move. I thought if I go down, I'll die too, and I drove away. I left him to die alone." The room was still, A young investigator bowed his head, unable to look. Boone continued, when Mrs. Ruth came to the station asking, I couldn't meet her eyes. Every year she came back, holding his photo. I dodged, said there was no evidence of foul play, but really, I was just lying to myself. The prosecutor asked, do you think if you'd reported it sooner, Elijah could have been saved? Boone replied softly, I think about that every day. Maybe not, but at least they'd have found the body sooner. That mother wouldn't have waited half a century. Heller said quietly, do you regret it? Boone looked straight at her, eyes misty. Regret is the only word I'll carry to the end. I held the truth too long. Saying it now doesn't bring relief, just lateness. The statement ended in silence. As the officers wheeled him out, Boone turned back, voice hoarse. If anyone asks, tell them I wasn't a bad man. I was just scared at the wrong time. Outside, snow fell heavier, blanketing the courthouse steps. News of the confession spread that very evening. Former sheriff admits hearing car plunge into lake, but not reporting it. The whole state buzzed. Some were angry, others just sighed. In Dover-Foxcroft, Caleb watched the news on TV, hearing Boone again. I was scared at the wrong time. He turned off the set, looked out at the lake. The ice was starting to thaw. In the darkness, the water gleamed like it was swallowing old sounds. The engine, the wind, and the silence of the man who'd taken half a century to speak the truth. After Boone confessed to hearing the car plunge into the lake, the cold case unit decided to expand the search around the spot where the Chevrolet Nova was recovered. Heller believed Elijah might have escaped the car before it sank. As the ice began melting in early March, the divers from Exploring with Depths returned to Sebec Lake with the Maine State Forensics team. Early morning, fog blanketed the water. Jeremy Sides checked the sonar gear, while Adam Brown adjusted the ROV drone's camera. Caleb stood on the shore, eyes fixed on the flat water. Jeremy said quietly, if Mr. Boone's right, the body's gotta be close. The small boat pushed off, gliding slowly over the gray murk. Adam ran the sonar sweep around the east area, where the lake bottom dropped deep amid tangled roots. After nearly an hour, the screen showed an odd shape, a small elongated mass tilted among root branches. Hold up, stop, Jeremy said, eyes glued to the display. The echo was stronger than usual. They lowered the drone, yellow light piercing the murky water. On the screen, roots emerged one by one, then a human form appeared, torso snagged in roots, dark fabric rotted away. No one spoke. Jeremy just whispered, that's him. Caleb froze, hands gripping the railing tight. The drone panned slower, light sweeping over a mud-caked face, arm bones still raised in reach. Black coat, jeans, matching the 1970 case description. Adam confirmed, the body's about 35 feet from the car, stuck under roots. Jeremy keyed the radio, body found. Call in forensics support. On shore, police cordoned off the area at once. When the remains were pulled up, mud sloughed off, revealing scraps of an old coat and waterlogged boots. Caleb watched the sealed bag placed on the stretcher, whispering, we found him. At the mobile forensics station by the lake, the examination happened that same day. Results: male victim, about 5'11", teeth and cheekbones, matching Elijah Littlefield's dental records. In the coat pocket, a rusted metal tag etched with E. Littlefield, the mill ID Ruth had kept a copy of. Forensics ruled death by drowning, combined with hypothermia. No signs of violence. Elijah may have gotten the car door open, tried to swim up, but got pulled by the cold current and snagged in roots. Water temp around 28 degrees, enough to paralyze in minutes. Hearing the results, Caleb sat on the shore, tears falling on hands clenched around the cleaned iron tag. Grandma, he's still here, he said. Jeremy put a hand on his shoulder, nodding gently. He's coming home. That afternoon, the Maine Cold Case Unit issued an official statement. The body found in Sebec Lake was Elijah Littlefield, missing since January 1970. The news hit the front page of the Bangor Daily News with the headline, Maine cold case Elijah found, after 54 years. At the Augusta Forensics Lab, Heller read the final report, voice low, no conspiracy, just one mistake, and 50 years of silence. She called Caleb, saying briefly, "Elijah's confirmed, we'll release the remains soon as possible." On the other end, Caleb replied softly, "Thank you, my grandma can rest now." 2 days later, a small black draped casket was brought to the Dover-Foxcroft funeral home. Townsfolk, police and even the dive team showed up. The afternoon sky was overcast, but faint light from the thawing lake reflected softly. Caleb stood before Elijah's photo, whispering. In the end, the lake gave back the one it held. As the hearse pulled away, Jeremy said to Adam, "Not every ending's happy, but at least this is truth." Adam nodded, eyes on the water. Both knew they'd just helped close a painful chapter for the town. That night, local TV aired the evening news. Elijah Littlefield's body found, after 54 years missing. The 1970 cold took his life, but justice finally beat the silence. In Ruth's old house, Caleb stood at the window, looking out at Sebec Lake, shimmering in moonlight. A light wind stirred, rippling the water. He said softly, "He's home, Grandma." And in that stillness, it seemed Sebec Lake, after half a century, had exhaled a long breath, like it had finally returned the memory it held too long. The trial of Harold Boone took place in the early summer of the following year, in the Piscataquis County Courthouse, where the Elijah Littlefield case file had been stored for over half a century. That morning, the Maine sky was clear blue, but the air in the town of Dover-Foxcroft was thick with silence. From early on, townspeople gathered on the courthouse lawn, aged faces who had lived through the winter of 1970, young people who only knew the story from the newspapers, and even those who had once worked under Boone. Everyone wanted to witness the end of the case that had haunted this town for over half a century. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was solemnly oppressive. Light streamed through the tall glass windows, shining down on the wooden bench where Boone sat, his frame frail, his hair snow-white, his hands clasped together on his knees. The old police uniform was gone, replaced only by a simple gray sweater and a hollow gaze. When the judge entered, everyone stood, except him. A police officer gently wheeled him toward the witness stand. Across the room, the prosecutor representing the state of Maine, Lisa Donnelly, a middle-aged woman with a steely voice, opened with a brief statement. "Your Honor, today we are not just trying a man, but trying silence itself. 54 years ago, a police officer saw, he heard, but he did nothing. That decision cost a life, and left a family in despair. And for 50 years, justice was buried under the ice of Sebec Lake." The room fell utterly silent. Boone didn't lift his head, he only closed his eyes slightly. His defense attorney Martin Keene, an old friend, stood up. His voice was slow, full of empathy. "My client does not deny the crime. He has confessed, he has cooperated with the investigation. But we must look at the context. A snowy night, primitive technology, a young officer alone. He was afraid, and that fear led him to choose wrong. But it was a human mistake, not malice." The court called Boone to testify. He gripped the arms of his wheelchair tightly, his voice trembling. "I have nothing to justify. That night, I heard the sound of the snowmobile, the metal hitting the water. I knew someone was out there, but I didn't dare go down. I thought, in the morning they'd find him, but they didn't, and I've lived with that sound in my head my whole life." A soft murmur rippled through the room. At the back, Caleb Ferris sat beside the victim's family row. He bowed his head, clutching Ruth's knitted scarf, the one he always carried to court. As he listened to Boone, his eyes blurred, unclear whether from anger or pity. The prosecutor continued. "Were you aware that your actions caused the case to be closed for over half a century?" Boone nodded slowly. "I knew, but I've been living with that sentence too. Every time it snows, I see myself standing on the shore, hearing the water. I thought time would erase it, but no, it only made the memory clearer." The courtroom hushed. Only the scratch of pens and the click of press cameras broke the quiet. The prosecution wrapped up its presentation with a short video provided by the Cold Case Unit, sonar images scanning the lake bottom, the Chevrolet Nova half buried in the mud, and drone footage of Elijah's body being found. Each frame seemed to etch itself into everyone's minds. When the video ended, a collective sigh rose. Boone bowed his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. It was the defense's turn, and Keene requested permission for his client to make a final statement. He looked around the room, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "There's no reason great enough to forgive me, but I want to apologize, with the Littlefield family, with this town, and with myself. I once thought silence would protect my reputation, but it turned out it only let me die slowly for 50 years. I deserve to be convicted, but if justice has mercy, please let me leave this life with one last truth." A few people in the room wiped away tears. Judge Richard Halloran, who was born in Dover-Foxcroft, looked at Boone for a long time before delivering the verdict. His voice was deep and measured. "Harold Boone, this court finds you guilty of obstruction of justice and falsifying public records. But the court also notes your self-surrender, full cooperation, and current health condition. Therefore the sentence is 3 years of probation under supervision, and a public apology to the victim's family." The room was silent. No one clapped, no one protested, only the faint sound of wind slipping through the window panes. Boone bowed his head, whispering, "Thank you." Immediately after the trial, the court allowed a private meeting between Boone and Elijah's family representative. In the small room, only Caleb Boone and a supervising officer. Boone sat still for a long moment before speaking, his voice raspy. "I once promised myself that if I lived to see this day, I'd say this. I'm sorry for that night, for 50 years of silence. I couldn't save him, and I didn't dare face Ruth. She deserved to hear the truth sooner." Caleb was silent, looking at the man before him, not the police icon of old, but just a broken old man. He replied softly, "I can't forgive for my grandmother, but I believe she hears you saying this." Boone nodded, his eyes welling up. "Thank you, young man. Now I can rest." The next day, local television aired the news: Harold Boone sentenced to 3 years probation in the Elijah Littlefield cold case. Victim's family receives official apology. The final shot was Boone leaving the courthouse, wheeled away in the gentle sunlight, his face serene, as if the last burden had been lifted. In Dover-Foxcroft, townspeople received the verdict with mixed emotions. Some said the sentence was light, others that it was enough. An old woman at the old gas station told a reporter, "Justice isn't always iron and steel. Sometimes, it's just someone brave enough to tell the truth." That afternoon, at St. Matthew's Church, a small memorial was held. Beside Elijah and Ruth's photos was a new card placed there. "Thank you for finding my son," or Caleb read the note, recognizing it as his grandmother's handwriting from years ago, left unfinished in a wooden box. He placed it beside a newly sent photo frame of Boone from the local paper, his aged face, eyes weary but at peace. As the choir sang Amazing Grace, the afternoon light streamed through the stained glass, illuminating the old photos. Caleb stood in the middle of the nave, whispering to himself, "Everyone's at peace now." Outside, Sebec Lake lay flat and calm. The water had cleared again, reflecting the deep blue summer sky. After half a century, every secret, every silence, every pain had been spoken. Boone carried guilt, but also his final apology. Elijah had come home, Ruth could rest, and the small Maine town had finally reclaimed the peace it had lost for 50 years. In the sunset, reflecting on the lake's surface, long streaks of light shimmered like Ruth's old necklace hanging by the window. Caleb watched, murmuring softly, "See, Grandma, justice still comes, even if late." And in the distant tolling of the church bells, it seemed as if Sebec Lake itself was exhaling in relief, as if finally, Maine no longer had to whisper to the past. The verdict in the Harold Boone case closed, but its aftershocks rippled through Dover-Foxcroft, like waves on Sebec Lake. Never had this small town buzzed like this. From the coffee shop on Main Street to the roadside market, every conversation revolved around the same theme: justice, accountability, and a half-century of silence. On community bulletin boards, people plastered clippings from the trial. A photo of Boone bowing his head in the wheelchair lay beside images of Elijah and Ruth, like a counterbalance between guilt and forgiveness. One comment scrawled in red ink under a newspaper: "Silence is also a crime." Another beside it: "No one's perfect, but everyone has a duty to speak the truth." The Piscataquis County Sheriff's Department became the focal point of criticism. Many residents sent letters demanding a full review of old cases. A town hall meeting at the courthouse was so packed they had to add chairs in the hallway. Townspeople stood to question, how can we trust the guardians of justice when they themselves once chose silence? The current sheriff, Mark Leland, had to bow his head and take responsibility for the whole system. "We can't change the past, but we can ensure this won't happen again." In the following weeks, the state of Maine announced the formation of a Police Investigation Ethics and Oversight Commission, using the Boone case as a prime example of systemic silence. The Portland Press-Herald ran a long editorial: "Fear isn't a crime, but hiding the truth is." The Elijah Littlefield case reminds us that justice can't wait for courage, it demands honesty. The news spread beyond state lines. National papers mentioned Dover-Foxcroft as a symbol of belated justice. A TV station invited Caleb for a live interview. He declined to appear on big screens, saying only over the phone, "I don't want this story to become TV drama. It's a family's memory, and a lesson for everyone." In town, reactions remained divided. Some who had worked under Boone were stunned, saying he was just human, not a monster. A retired cop said, "Back then, tech was poor, the blizzard fierce. He was scared, and fear is real." But for many others, that sympathy wasn't enough. They said, Elijah died because of someone else's fear, and Ruth lived the rest of her life in doubt. The community began looking back at its own past. Many families with old missing persons cases approached the cold case unit for help. Heller, in a brief interview, said, "One closed case can open many other questions." Sometimes, justice isn't just in the courtroom, but in how a community faces its memories. One early August morning, the Maine sky was a rare clear blue. By Sebec Lake, a memorial for Elijah Littlefield was held, not grand, but solemn. A quiet procession walked the dirt path to the water's edge. Those who had known Elijah as a young man, those who only knew the story from papers, all were there. Even some young officers from the department attended, out of uniform, wearing only small badges on their shirts. On a makeshift wooden podium, Caleb stood at the microphone. A breeze from the lake rustled the photo of Elijah on the wooden frame. He spoke slowly, his voice low. For many years this lake was a symbol of silence. It held in its depths a man, a truth, and the pain of an entire town. Today, we're not here to condemn anyone, but to remember that justice isn't just in the verdict, but in our willingness to face the truth. He bowed his head, placing a white daisy at the water's edge. The gentle waves lapping the shore seemed like a response. Heller stepped up, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've done what your grandma wanted most." Caleb only nodded slightly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The ceremony ended with amazing grace, sung by the local choir amid the wind and sun. A small boat set out, releasing a white wreath into the lake's center. As the petals spread, the water mirrored the golden sunlight, like a vast mirror, where past, present, and serenity met. Reporters captured the moment. The photo ran on the front page of the next day's Bangor Daily News, a white wreath drifting on the still lake, captioned below, "Sebec Lake, where justice no longer sleeps." After the memorial, townspeople quietly returned home. No one spoke loudly, no one gossiped. It felt as if the town had exhaled, after 50 years of holding its breath. In front of the sheriff's office, a small plaque was erected, a gift from the cold case unit, for those who waited for justice, and those brave enough to find it. That afternoon, Caleb drove around the lake one last time before leaving Maine. The sunlight reflected on the flat water. He rolled down the window, listening to the wind rush in. The sound, Ruth once said, "sounds like my boy's whisper." He smiled, murmuring, "Grandma." They heard him. As the car faded behind the pines, Sebec Lake returned to its inherent calm. But in the town's heart, no one looked at the lake the same way anymore. They knew that beneath its surface lay not just a car, a man, but a lesson that truth can be buried, but it never truly dies. A week after Elijah's memorial, Dover-Foxcroft returned to its normal rhythm. The snow had melted, Sebec Lake's surface clear blue, reflecting the early summer sun. The white petals from the ceremony still drifted lazily on gentle waves, like the town's belated farewell to the past. That morning, the Exploring with Depths team packed up their gear. Jeremy Sides and Adam Brown checked the boat, coiled the sonar cables. Caleb came to see them off, hands deep in his jacket pockets, eyes tracing the still water. "Thanks for everything," he said. "Without you guys, this story would have stayed buried forever." Jeremy smiled. "We just helped the water say what it had held too long. The lake's at peace now." They shook hands, then parted in silence. The two silver trucks left town, rolling down the winding pine road. The engine noise faded, leaving only the wind whispering over the lake. Caleb watched them go for a long time, then turned back to the dirt path leading to Ruth's old house. On the way, he stopped at the bend, where the Chevrolet had been found. Now there were no buoys, no cables, just clear, flat water. He picked up a small stone, tossed it lightly into the lake. The ripples spread, then dissolved, like a goodbye to the one who had gone. That afternoon, the slanting sun lit the water in shimmering silver. Caleb sat by the shore, opening Ruth's small notebook. The last line she wrote was, "If you're out there somewhere, let your mom know." He smiled faintly, closing the book. "Now you know, Grandma." That evening, he returned to the old house. In the living room, the frames of Ruth and Elijah still sat side by side. The golden lamplight cast on the foggy glass, making their faces seem to smile together. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, looking toward the lake. The full moon had just risen, its light sparkling on the water. The night breeze carried the scent of damp wood and pine. In that moment, he thought he heard her voice, thin and light as breath. "Justice doesn't vanish, it just waits for someone brave enough to find it." The next morning, Caleb left town. His car rolled slowly along the lakeside road, where snow had once blanketed everything. The radio replayed the news, the Elijah Littlefield case, a chapter closed, a lesson that endures. Truth always exists, it just needs someone to find it. Caleb turned off the radio, rolled down the window, letting the cool mist rush in. In the rearview mirror, he saw Sebec Lake reflecting the sky, clear and still, as if it had never known darkness. In Dover-Foxcroft, townspeople erected a small plaque by the lake, near the path to the water. Engraved on it, Elijah Littlefield 1949-1970. "Justice doesn't get lost, it just waits to be found." Around it, people placed small stones etched with 3 words: truth, courage, faith. Whenever the sun hit them, those 3 words gleamed, like the 3 things the whole town had spent 50 years learning to understand. That afternoon, the lake lay flat and calm. Gulls flew overhead, their white wings casting shadows on the water. Beneath the surface, old tree roots swayed in the clear current. Everything was strangely peaceful, as if time had finally closed the old chapter. Summer arrived, the lakeside pines greening again. Town kids played by the shore, unaware of the story that had once silenced adults for decades. Sometimes, the elders still told them about a young man lost in a blizzard, a mother who waited, and a cop who learned to face his mistake. But their voices held no sorrow anymore, just light as the wind over the lake. As dusk fell, the last sunlight scattered gold across Sebec's surface. Caleb, now gone from Maine, still dreamed of that image. The lake thawing, light reflecting, gentle ripples like whispers. He always heard Heller's words in his mind: "Truth doesn't die, Caleb, it just waits to be found." Night. Sebec Lake lay mirror flat. Moonlight drifted across the water, spreading into long silver streaks. From afar, church bells tolled in echoes. A soft wind skimmed the surface, rippling it like a whisper. Truth doesn't get lost. It just sleeps beneath the lake, waiting for someone brave enough to find it. And so it ended. No more silence, no more doubt, only a town that had reclaimed its faith, a lake returned to peace, and a memory laid down gently, after half a century. Sebec Lake reflected the Maine sky, blue, deep and calm as truth itself, quiet, but immortal. The story at Sebec Lake touches on today's American issues: public accountability, the power of community, and a family's perseverance in the face of systemic silence. Ruth wrote letters for half a century, keeping copies of reports and notes. Boone was there. Caleb didn't let the files gather dust, but proactively contacted the Maine Cold Case Unit and a volunteer dive team using sonar ROV. Inspector Heller reviewed the duty log, revealing a gap at 3:05 a.m. Finally, the memorial ceremony by the lake and a public apology helped the town heal. From these very specific details, the practical lesson is: don't underestimate the power of records and persistence. If your family faces a missing situation, keep a contact log, save police report receipts, request report summaries under Public Records Law, FOIA State Public Records, and note unusual timelines like Ruth did. When local agencies are overwhelmed or hesitant, open legal detours, reach out to the State Cold Case Unit, the Attorney General's Office, or specialized nonprofits, diving digital searches. On the other hand, Boone's story reminds us that misplaced fear can become prolonged sin. Leaders, teachers, healthcare, police, everyone has their own stormy nights, but must report honestly. Don't wordsmith to evade responsibility. Build internal checks and balances, ethical oversight, and psychological training for frontline personnel, so fear doesn't become silence. Finally, when the community is divided, do as in the Sebec Lake ceremony. Put the fax license plate M749, vehicle location, forensic conclusions at the center before debating emotions. Technology helps us look to the bottom of the water, but it's civic discipline, note-taking, questioning, attending town meetings, that brings the truth ashore. Truth doesn't disappear, it waits for those brave and persistent enough. Thank you for joining us on this journey to the end of the Sebec Lake story, where the truth, after more than half a century, is finally seen. Subscribe to the channel to continue exploring other forgotten cases with us, where justice is still waiting to be called by name.